There were 6 children born to the Irish Anglican priest Patrick Bronte and his wife Maria Branwell. Sadly, Miss Bronte died 9 months after giving birth to Anne, which left Maria and Elizabeth to raise their 4 younger siblings.
The oldest 2 of the 6 children, Maria and Elizabeth, were sent to the clergy daughters' school along with Charlotte and Emily. In 1825, Maria and Elizabeth were sent home because they were diagnosed with tuberculosis. A few days later, Charlotte and Emily returned completely healthy. 5 years after tuberculosis claimed the lives of Maria and Elizabeth, Charlotte and Emily were finally sent to Miss Wooler's school, which was much closer to their hometown Haworth. Charlotte ended up being the oldest child in the family after the deaths of Maria and Elizabeth. Charlotte eventually came to view the poor conditions at Clergy Daughters' School as the cause of her sisters' deaths, and used this to write the beginning of her first published novel, Jane Eyre. In the story, Jane goes to a boarding school called Lowood Institution. Lowood has very harsh conditions such as cold rooms, thin clothing, and poor meals. This was inspired by Charlotte's own experience in school as well as her sisters'. One of Jane's few friends in school, Helen, dies of tuberculosis. Later in life, Jane becomes a governess, the same thing that Charlotte did. As with all of Charlotte's novels, there is a love story. The novel explores Jane's rocky relationship with a man named Rochester and the struggles they go through to be together. Many people try to keep them apart, but they fight against them. This seems to be a common theme for romance stories written by the Bronte sisters. Charlotte's second book, Shirley, is about the relationships between a mill owner, Robert, his brother, Louis, an independent, wealthy young woman named Shirley, and her poor friend, Caroline. When Charlotte was writing this book, 3 of her siblings died. Patrick first, then Emily, followed by Anne. This left Charlotte the last living Bronte child. The character of Caroline is believed to be very loosely based on Anne, while Shirley is what Charlotte believed Emily would have been like if their family had been wealthy. Charlotte's final published novel is about a man named William Crimsworth, how he matures, his relationships, and how he becomes a teacher at a girls' school. The Professor was actually Charlotte's first book, but was very unsuccessful when she originally tried to get it published. After she died, her husband, Arthur Bell Nichols, reviewed and edited the book. This novel was also the base material for Villette. Villette has the most connections to Charlotte's personal life. The book follows a girl named Lucy Snow from the time when she was little to when she was in her late 20s. Lucy goes to the city of Villette in the fictional country of the Kingdom of Labassecour, despite the fact that she doesn't know the language. She is hired to teach English at Madame Beck's boarding school, where she reunites with her childhood friend, Graham, and falls in love with him, but this comes to an end when another childhood friend, Polly, arrives. Lucy eventually falls in love with a man named Paul, who also teaches at the school. But people such as Madame Beck and the relatives of his dead fiancé do everything they can to keep Lucy and Paul apart. Charlotte described the ending as a little puzzle. This book was largely based on Charlotte's experiences in Brussels, Belgium. She originally went there despite the fact that she did not speak French to teach at a boarding school with her sister Emily. The 2 of them went home when their aunt, Elizabeth Branwell, died, but Charlotte eventually came back to teach at the school again. Her experience the second time in Belgium was not as pleasant as the first. She fell in love with a married man, and after becoming extremely lonely and homesick, decided to go home for good. Charlotte, for the most part, tended to use her own misfortunes to create her successful novels. She, like her sisters, used a pen name, Currer Bell, because she was a woman.
Like you'd expect from one of the Bronte sisters, Emily wrote a lot of poems and stories, but she was most famous for her book, Wuthering Heights. Because Emily is a woman, she used the pen name Ellis Bell, so technically Ellis Bell's most famous book was Wuthering Heights. Anyway, the book follows 2 families for 2 generations, the Earnshaws, who live in Wuthering Heights, and the Lintons, who live in Thrushcross Grange. The main character is a black boy named Heathcliff, who was fostered into the Earnshaws' home. The story is tied to Heathcliff's love for his foster sister, Catherine Earnshaw, and his actions when she supposedly rejects him. Emily lived in Haworth while she was growing up, a small village surrounded by moors, which is similar to the setting of Wuthering Heights. The motherless characters in her book are tied to the fact that Emily's mother died when she was young.
According to Schmoop.com, Wuthering Heights is actually categorized as a romance, even though Heathcliff and Catherine spend most of the book making each other's lives miserable. But if that isn't love, I don't know what is.
In 1847, when the book was first published, it was very controversial because most books of that time didn't portray mental and physical abuse in such blatant terms. Also, it went against Victorian ideals, such as religious hypocrisy, morality, social classes, and gender inequality, which ironically are ideals some people still struggle with today.
Even though the last child in the Bronte family, Anne, was overshadowed by her more famous sisters, she was also a writer. Like her sisters, she went under the male guise of Acton Bell, when she wrote 2 novels, Agnes Grey and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Agnes Grey is a story of a woman named Agnes Grey, who early in life loses 4 of her 5 siblings, similarly to the way Anne lost 2 of her 5 siblings. Anne was a governess for a few years, and she uses this experience to write about Agnes's time with the Bloomfields. She takes care of Tom, a 7-year-old who likes to dismember small animals, Mary Ann, a little girl who throws tantrums, and Fanny, a 4-year-old who likes to spit in people's faces. With a very stern father and a mother who believes she birthed 3 perfect angels into the world, it's no wonder Agnes gets fired for not doing her job. She quickly finds a new position with the Murrays, taking care of Matilda and Rosalie. Even though these girls trap Agnes in their antics, it's a much better environment than the dysfunctional Bloomfield household. While she's working for the Murrays, she meets her love interest, Mr. Edward Weston. But while love is blooming in the air, Agnes receives a letter from her sister, Mary, that has her rushing home. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is a 3-part story about a widow named Helen Graham and her son who move into Wildfell Hall. Because of Helen's mysterious history, Gilbert Markham loses interest in Eliza Millward in favor for Miss Graham. Eliza begins to spread rumors about Helen out of jealousy that end up not working in her favor. In fact, these rumors cause Gilbert to get into a fight with his best friend. Eventually, Gilbert asks Helen to marry him, but when she declines without an explanation, he gets kinda angry. In response to his anger, she gives him her diaries from when she was married to her abusive husband, Arthur Huntington. It's hard to pinpoint what Anne's inspiration was for The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, because the only exposure to a married couple would have been her parents when she was 7 months old. Despite the courageous and independent female main character who broke free from her husband and the appalling treatment of women in both books, they sold very well, just like all the Belle Bronte books. And as the trend goes for anyone in the Bronte family, at the age of 29, Anne also died from tuberculosis.
Believe it or not, there was actually a forgotten child in the Bronte family. You never guessed from the title, Bronte Sisters, that there would actually be a Bronte brother as well. His name was Patrick Branwell. Unlike his sister's way with words, he was very gifted with the paintbrush. Branwell received very little education as a child, but his family still believed him to be a genius. Even though he loved to paint, he could not make a living out of it. He actually failed to retain 3 jobs before his sister Anne helped him get a teaching job for the family she used to be a governess for. These numerous amounts of failure amassed his self-pity and led him down the path of alcohol and opium addiction. After Branwell moved in with his father, he became ill and died, probably from tuberculosis.